It was a bright Sunday morning in Virginia, and the sky was a clear blue. The streets were almost empty except for the sound of 5 motorcycles rumbling down the highway. The riders were a group of friends who loved adventure and attention. They had been riding together for years, exploring towns and taking long road trips just for fun. The leader of the group was Mark, a confident man in his 30s who enjoyed being the center of attention. With him were his friends Jake, Leo, Chris, and Ryan, each one loud, carefree, and always ready for something new. They had started their ride early, stopping at small cafes along the way. Wherever they went, people turned their heads because of the roaring engines and the shining bikes. The group liked that. They loved when people noticed them. By the time they reached Arlington, the sun was high and the roads shimmered with heat. None of them had planned to visit any particular place, but when they saw the road sign that said Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, 1 mile ahead, Mark grinned. "Let's check it out," he said through his helmet. "Might be a cool spot for pictures." The others agreed. None of them knew much about the place except that it was famous and always guarded by soldiers. That made it sound even more interesting to them. They imagined it would be like visiting a museum, just another stop on their long, fun ride. As they turned into the area, the mood began to change. The streets became quieter. Trees lined both sides of the road, their leaves moving gently in the soft wind. The sound of the motorcycles echoed against the white stone walls, breaking the stillness that filled the air. It was peaceful, almost sacred, something they didn't notice right away. When they parked their bikes, the loud engines went silent one by one. For a moment, they just looked around. There were a few tourists walking slowly, some families with children, and an elderly couple standing quietly near the gate. Everyone seemed calm, respectful, and quiet. But the bikers, being used to noise and excitement, didn't really understand the mood of the place. Chris took off his helmet and looked toward the long marble path that led up to the memorial. "Man, this place is serious," he said. "Look at that guard standing there, doesn't even move." The others followed his gaze. There he was, a tall, uniformed soldier walking with perfect precision. Every step was the same length, every turn sharp and exact. His face was calm, his posture straight, and his movements timed like a machine. He carried his rifle firmly, yet with grace. Jake chuckled. "He's been doing that for hours, huh? Must get boring." "Let's get a photo with him in the back," Leo suggested, pulling out his phone. "Would look cool for the ride album." They didn't mean harm, they were just acting like tourists who didn't know the rules. They started walking closer, laughing and talking loudly, their boots clicking against the clean stone walkway. A few nearby visitors frowned but said nothing. The bikers weren't being aggressive, just careless, unaware that this was not an ordinary memorial. Mark raised his arm and pointed. "Hey, let's get closer. That's a better angle. Look at the way he marches." The guard continued his movement, eyes fixed straight ahead. Every 21 steps, he stopped, turned, and paused for 21 seconds before walking again. The silence and rhythm of his actions had a power that none of the bikers could understand yet. A woman standing nearby whispered to her son to be quiet, but the bikers' voices filled the air again. They started laughing about how serious the guard looked. To them, it was just an interesting moment, something to post about later. Then the first small sign of discomfort appeared. A park ranger standing a few feet away looked at them carefully. His face was calm, but his eyes showed that he was paying attention. Still, the bikers didn't notice. They were too busy trying to take their photos and record videos. "Man, we're gonna go viral," Ryan said with a grin. 5 bikers meet the statue soldier. They laughed again, and that laughter broke through the respectful silence of the crowd. Tourists began stepping back, unsure of what would happen next. A few even pulled out their phones, sensing that something was about to go wrong. Mark walked closer to the guard's path, his boots echoing across the marble. "Hey, how long do you stand like that?" He called out in a light, joking tone. He expected no answer, maybe a small reaction. But the guard did not move, did not speak, did not even blink. His discipline was unshakable. For a moment, Mark felt small under that silence. There was something about the way the soldier moved, a quiet authority, a sense of duty so strong that it made everything else seem unimportant. But then his friends laughed again, breaking that moment of reflection. "Guess he's not allowed to talk," Leo said loudly. "Maybe he's a robot." A few people gasped quietly. The elderly man who had been standing nearby shook his head, his voice soft but firm. "You boys should show some respect," he said. "That man's guarding something greater than any of us." The bikers turned toward him, surprised. They weren't used to being corrected by strangers. For a second, they stood silently, unsure how to respond. Then Chris shrugged. "We're just taking a look," he said quickly. "Didn't mean anything." The old man nodded slowly. "Then keep your voices low. That's not just a statue. It's a symbol of every soldier who never came home." His words hung in the air like a weight. The group went quiet for a brief moment, but then Jake, trying to lighten the mood, said, all right, let's just finish our photo and head out." But as they moved closer again, the air around them seemed to change. The guard had turned once more and was now facing their direction. His boots clicked sharply against the marble floor. He stopped, turned, and his gaze fell straight ahead, in their line. Even though his eyes didn't focus on them directly, something about his stance made the bikers stop moving. He didn't have to speak. His presence alone was commanding. For a long, tense second, nobody moved. Then, in a clear and powerful voice, the guard spoke. His tone was deep and calm, but it carried strength that echoed across the area. "Remain silent and respectful. Step back immediately." Every sound vanished. The bikers froze. The tourists stopped breathing. Even the wind seemed to pause. The 5 friends looked at one another. None of them had expected him to speak. It wasn't loud or angry. It was controlled and firm, the kind of voice that came from years of discipline. Mark stepped back almost automatically, but Jake laughed nervously, trying to hide his discomfort. "He actually talked," he whispered. "That's crazy." Ryan elbowed him lightly. "Maybe we should just go, man." Mark nodded slowly, looking again at the guard. There was something different in his eyes now. Not fear, but understanding. He began to realize that this place was not meant for fun or games. It was a place where time stood still for those who gave everything. Without another word, the bikers slowly backed away from the walkway. The tourists relaxed slightly, but the guard never looked away from his line. He continued his precise march just as before, his duty unbroken. The bikers returned to their bikes, and for the first time that day, they were quiet. The engines roared again, but the noise didn't feel the same anymore. Something about the guards' calm authority had left a deep mark on their minds. As they rode off, the silence of that moment stayed with them. None of them said it out loud, but each one felt that they had just come face to face with something they couldn't quite explain, a living symbol of respect, honor, and discipline. The bikers left the memorial area and stopped at a small parking lot nearby. The engines went silent one by one. For a few moments, no one said anything. The same group that was laughing minutes ago now seemed lost in thought. Mark removed his gloves and sat on the edge of his bike, staring at the ground. "What just happened back there?" Ryan finally said, breaking the silence. Chris shrugged. "We just got told off by a guard, that's all. No big deal." But even he didn't sound convinced. The guard's voice still echoed in their minds, calm, strong, and impossible to forget. It wasn't the kind of voice that came from anger. It was the kind that came from duty and deep respect. Jake tried to lighten the mood again. "Come on, guys. We didn't do anything wrong. We just talked a bit loud. It's not like we hurt anyone." Leo looked up. "Maybe. But the way everyone was staring at us, it didn't feel right." "That place is something else, man." Mark stayed quiet. He wasn't the kind of person who easily admitted being wrong, but he could feel that what they had done was out of place. The stillness, the silence, and the way the guard had spoken, it all carried a meaning he couldn't ignore. After a few minutes, the group decided to get a drink before continuing their ride. They went to a nearby cafe and took a corner table. The place was quiet, filled with people who seemed relaxed and calm. The bikers ordered iced coffees, but their usual jokes and laughter were missing. Mark looked out the window, watching a few tourists walk by. "Do you guys know what that place really is?" he asked softly. Ryan shook his head. "It's a soldier's memorial, right?" "Yeah," Mark said. "But it's more than that. I read about it once, the tomb of the unknown soldier. It's for soldiers who died in war and were never identified. They don't even know who's buried there. The guard we saw is part of the Army's honor unit. They take turns guarding the tomb all day and all night, no matter the weather." Everyone listened quietly. None of them had known the full story before. Leo leaned forward. "So they stand there even in rain or snow?" "Yeah," Mark said. 24 hours a day. Every day. It's one of the highest honors in the military. They trained for months to do it. The group went silent again. The thought of someone standing in perfect discipline, through heat, cold, and rain just to protect a silent tomb. It made their earlier laughter feel foolish. Jake sighed. "Man, I feel bad now. We acted like it was some tourist show." Ryan nodded. "I didn't realize it was that serious. That guy wasn't just doing a job. He was doing something sacred." Chris tapped his cup, thinking, "No wonder he told us to step back. We really did disturb that silence." For a while, no one said anything more. The hum of soft music played in the background, and the cool air from the ceiling fans brushed gently against their faces. They could feel the weight of the morning settling in, a quiet lesson that had come unexpectedly. After finishing their drinks, they stepped out of the cafe. The road stretched ahead, but none of them were in a hurry anymore. Usually their rides were filled with laughter, shouting, and loud music playing from their speakers. But now the sound of engines felt heavier, like it carried something they didn't want to lose. As they rode past the memorial again, Mark slowed down and stopped for a moment at a distance. He didn't go near the gate, just looked at it from where he was. The guard was still there, marching with the same precision as before. Step, turn, pause. Step, turn, pause. The rhythm never changed. People stood quietly watching. No one dared to speak. Mark felt something inside him shift. "He's still there," he said through his helmet mic. "Same pace. Same walk." Jake pulled up beside him. "He doesn't stop for anyone." "That's dedication." "Yeah," Mark said softly. "That's honor." He wanted to stay and watch, maybe even walk back and apologize, but the others were ready to move on. So he started his bike again, the sound echoing in the distance as they left the area behind. The road ahead led through quiet neighborhoods and green fields. Normally they would have sped through, but today the ride was slower, thoughtful. The wind rushed past them, but their minds were somewhere else, back at the marble walkway where one man stood alone in silence. By the time they reached a small rest stop, the afternoon sun was lowering in the sky. They parked their bikes and sat on a wooden bench under a tree. The golden light made everything glow softly. For a while they didn't talk about what had happened. They talked about other things, work, family, their next trip, but the mood wasn't the same. After a while, Leo said, "You know, I think that guard taught us something without even meaning to." "What do you mean?" Ryan asked. He didn't shout. He didn't get angry. He just said one thing, and it was enough to make everyone quiet. That kind of respect doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing what's right. Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's the kind of control I don't think I've ever had." He didn't even flinch when we acted up. Just stayed calm. "That takes strength," Chris sighed. "We travel around so much doing whatever we want. Maybe it's easy to forget that some people live their whole lives by discipline and duty." The words hung in the air for a moment. None of them argued. They all knew he was right. As the evening light turned orange, Mark looked out toward the road again. "You know what? I think we should go back tomorrow morning." But this time quietly. "No bikes, no jokes, just to watch." Jake raised his eyebrows. "You serious?" "Yeah," Mark said. "We messed up. It doesn't hurt to show respect." The others looked at each other and slowly, one by one, they nodded. They spent the night at a nearby motel, talking less and thinking more. The sounds of motorcycles on the highway outside felt distant, almost meaningless compared to the memory of that guard's calm, steady march. In the quiet of his room, Mark lay awake, thinking about what it must be like to stand there hour after hour, protecting the silence of someone unknown, someone who once fought for everyone but had no name left behind. It made him realize how small his actions were in comparison. The next morning came with a cool breeze and soft light. True to his word, Mark and his friends dressed simply, no loud jackets, no flashy helmets, and walked to the memorial. They didn't say a word as they approached. The guard was there again, just as before, perfect in every step. They stood among the visitors, quietly watching. No one laughed. No one spoke. The only sounds were the measured steps of the guard's boots and the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Mark felt a lump rise in his throat. He didn't know why, but something about that moment made him deeply emotional. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was respect and pure and real. He finally understood what that place meant, and why people stood there in silence. Without saying anything, he took off his hat and held it to his chest. His friends did the same. Around them, the crowd stood still, and for the first time since they arrived, the bikers truly blended into that silence. When they finally turned to leave, no one took photos. No one looked back for attention. They just walked away quietly, each of them carrying the same lesson. That respect doesn't need words or applause. It just needs understanding. As they reached their bikes again, Mark smiled faintly. "Guess we found something more powerful than speed today," he said. Ryan nodded. Yeah, silence. The next morning was quiet and cool. The sky was light blue with a few white clouds drifting slowly. The 5 bikers, Mark, Jake, Leo, Chris, and Ryan, had decided to stop at the memorial one last time before heading back home. The visit the day before had left a deep impression on them, and they wanted to pay their respects properly this time. They parked their bikes far away, near the outer lot, and walked the rest of the distance. None of them spoke much. They had agreed that there would be no loud jokes or talking, just quiet observation. The path leading to the tomb of the unknown soldier looked even more peaceful in the early morning light. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and the air felt cool against their faces. When they reached the main area, a small crowd was already gathered. The guard stood there as before, and precise, calm, and focused. Every step he took was measured, every turn sharp. The sight was still as powerful as the first time they had seen it. The whole place felt like time had stopped. Mark and his friends stood at the edge of the crowd. They didn't speak, but their expressions showed respect. Each one of them watched in silence the way others did. For a while, everything was peaceful. But after some time, Jake grew restless. He was the youngest of the group and often the most playful. Standing quietly for too long made him uncomfortable. He whispered to Leo, "Let's take a photo from a better angle." "Just one, no noise, I promise." Leo frowned. "Don't, man. Let's just stay here. You saw what happened yesterday." But Jake smiled. "It's fine. I'll just walk a little closer, that's all. No one will even notice." Before anyone could stop him, Jake took out his phone and began moving toward the walkway, trying to find a spot for a better picture. He didn't mean to disrespect the place, he was just being careless again. But his footsteps echoed against the marble floor, breaking the silence. A few people in the crowd turned their heads. Mark felt his heart skip. "Jake," he whispered sharply, but Jake didn't hear. He was focused on his camera, trying to frame the perfect shot with the guard in the distance. The guard was still marching. Step, turn, pause. His movements didn't change, but his awareness did. Even though he didn't look directly at Jake, he knew someone had stepped too close. Every tomb guard is trained to notice even the smallest disturbance. Jake took another step forward. His boot touched the edge of the ceremonial walkway, the sacred space where only the guard is allowed to walk. At that moment, everything changed. The guard stopped. The sound of his steps ended suddenly, and the air around them felt frozen. Tourists went completely silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. The guard turned sharply and faced in Jake's direction. His expression didn't show anger. It showed authority. His voice came out strong and clear, echoing across the space. "Remain behind the rail. Do not cross the line." Jake froze. The firmness of that voice hit him harder than any shout could have. It wasn't loud or rude, it was calm and full of purpose. It carried weight, the kind of weight that comes from deep respect and duty. Mark quickly stepped forward, grabbing Jake's arm and pulling him back. "What are you doing?" he whispered urgently. Jake lowered his phone, embarrassed. "I just wanted one photo," he muttered. The people around them stared quietly. Some shook their heads, others simply watched, waiting to see what would happen next. The guard didn't move. He stood still, his eyes straight ahead, his rifle in perfect position. His face showed discipline, not emotion. Leo whispered, We should leave. Now. But before they could move away completely, Jake made a mistake. Trying to cover his embarrassment, he laughed nervously. "Man, that guy is serious," he said softly, but the sound still carried in the quiet air. The guard took one firm step forward, boots clicking sharply against the marble. His voice came again, calm but powerful. "It is requested that everyone maintain silence and respect." Every person in the crowd stopped moving. The words seemed to fill the entire space. Jake's laughter died instantly. His phone lowered completely and his eyes went down. Mark felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He stepped forward slightly, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder.
"Come on," he whispered.
"Let's just go." Jake nodded slowly. His face had turned pale. For the first time, he truly understood the seriousness of what he had done. It wasn't just about a rule. It was about respect for something far bigger than any one person. As the bikers quietly stepped back, two park security officers approached from the side. They weren't aggressive. Their tone was calm and professional. "Gentlemen, please remain behind the boundary," one of them said softly. "This is a restricted area." Mark immediately nodded. "We understand." "We're sorry, sir. It won't happen again." The officer gave a polite nod. "Thank you," he said, then returned to his position nearby. The group stepped all the way back, standing again with the crowd. The guard resumed his precise march as if nothing had happened. Step, turn, pause. The rhythm continued, calm and steady. The silence returned. Jake stood quietly, his hands trembling slightly. He looked down at his phone, then turned it off and slipped it into his pocket. "I messed up," he said softly. Mark put a hand on his shoulder. "It's all right. Just remember this. Not everything needs to be recorded. Some things are meant to be felt." The crowd slowly relaxed again, the moment passing into memory. But for those who had witnessed it, the sight of the guard's calm authority would stay with them for a long time. After a few more minutes, the bikers quietly walked away. None of them spoke until they were far from the crowd. When they finally reached their bikes, Ryan broke the silence. "That was close. I thought they were going to throw us out." Mark shook his head. "They didn't have to. That guard's voice alone was enough." Leo nodded. "Yeah, he didn't shout or move fast. Just one command and the whole place froze. That's real discipline." Jake leaned against his bike, still shaken. "I didn't mean to disrespect anything. I just thought..." Mark stopped him gently. "I know. But now you understand why silence matters there. That's not a place to play. It's a place to honor people who can't speak for themselves anymore." Jake nodded slowly. His eyes looked heavy, filled with regret. "I get it now. I really do." The group stayed there for a while, the morning sun warming their backs. The noise of traffic in the distance felt strange after so much silence. Every one of them was thinking about what had just happened, not out of fear but out of respect. Before leaving, Mark looked back once more toward the memorial. He could still see the guard's figure moving with the same precision. The man hadn't changed his pace at all, as if the disturbance had never happened. That level of focus amazed him. "He didn't even break form," Mark said quietly. "That's what honor looks like." The others followed his gaze. The guard continued his march, steady and exact, as the crowd watched in quiet admiration. As they finally mounted their bikes, Mark said softly through his helmet mic, "Let's remember this day, not as something embarrassing, but as something that taught us a lesson." The engines started one by one, but this time they didn't rev loudly. They rode away slowly, passing through the tree-lined road that led out of the cemetery grounds. None of them looked back, but in their hearts, they carried the image of that guard, the man who didn't need anger to teach respect, who didn't need force to command attention. For the bikers, the challenge hadn't been about strength or defiance. It had been about understanding the meaning of silence, honor, and discipline. And in that quiet morning, they had finally learned what true strength really looked like. As they rode on, Mark thought about how one moment of pride had turned into a moment of humility. Life had strange ways of teaching lessons, and sometimes it only took 60 seconds of silence to change everything. The morning sun was just beginning to climb higher, casting long shadows across the white marble of the memorial. The 5 bikers had parked their motorcycles in the lot again, farther than yesterday, and approached the tomb of the unknown soldier with quiet steps. Today their approach was careful, thoughtful, and deliberate. The lesson from yesterday lingered in their minds. reminding them that this was not a place for jokes, attention, or careless actions. As they reached the perimeter, a small group of visitors stood silently, cameras lowered, taking in the solemn scene. The guard marched back and forth in his precise rhythm, each step, each pause, measured and exact. Step, turn, pause, step, turn, pause. There was something hypnotic about the motion, a silent reminder of discipline, respect, and honor. For a while, the bikers simply watched. They didn't speak, they didn't laugh, and they didn't even fidget. It felt strange to be this quiet after their usual road trips, where noise and movement were normal. But the calm, disciplined presence of the guard demanded a certain respect that they hadn't fully understood until now. Then, out of nowhere, a small thought crept into Jake's mind, the same impulsive energy that had caused trouble yesterday. "What if we just walk closer a little bit?" he whispered to Leo. "Just a tiny step toward the guard and no one will care." Leo's eyes widened. "Jake, no. Remember what happened yesterday? We learned our lesson. Let's just stay back." Jake smiled nervously but hesitated. He didn't want to cause trouble, but the temptation to capture a unique photo was strong. He slowly lifted his phone and glanced toward the guard. The line marking the sacred perimeter seemed close, almost invisible. One small step, he thought, would make no difference. But this was a place where every step mattered. One small misstep could disrupt the silence, break the discipline, and draw immediate attention. Jake didn't know it yet, but the guard's awareness extended to every inch of the area. He took a single step forward. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. His boot brushed against the ceremonial walkway, the sacred space where only the guard was allowed to walk. In an instant, the guard stopped mid-step. The sound of his boots clicking against the marble ceased. Step, stop, silence. Every person in the area froze. Tourists instinctively held their breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. The guard turned slowly, deliberately facing Jake. His posture didn't change, but his presence filled the entire area. The quiet authority of that single man was overwhelming, commanding attention without a word of anger. Then he spoke. The words were calm, but the strength in them carried across the marble plaza. "Step back. You are entering a restricted area. Maintain silence and respect." Jake froze instantly. His heart raced and his phone slipped slightly from his hands. He had expected laughter, maybe surprise, but nothing this forceful. There was no yelling, no physical confrontation, just authority so absolute that it demanded obedience. Mark and the others immediately stepped forward, urging him to retreat. "Jake, stop, go back," Mark whispered urgently, holding his friend's arm. The guard took one measured step forward. Every click of his boots echoed across the plaza, precise and controlled. The space seemed to shrink around Jake as the guard's presence loomed, not in anger, but in absolute command. Jake swallowed hard. He realized instantly that this wasn't a game, a joke, or a stunt. This was a lesson in discipline, respect, and honor. Every soldier who had ever been part of this sacred duty had trained for moments like this, to maintain calm while others faltered. The park security officers appeared quietly, moving with professional calm. They didn't rush, they didn't shout, and they didn't touch anyone. Their eyes were sharp, their presence reassuring, but the moment had already reached its peak. "Sir," one of the officers said softly to Jake, "please step back immediately. This is a protected area." Jake nodded quickly, embarrassment washing over him. "Yes, sir, I'm sorry," he said. Step by step, he backed away, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The guard never raised his voice, never shifted from his precise rhythm, and yet the lesson was crystal clear. Respect this place. Respect the unknown soldiers. Respect the silence. As Jake stepped back fully, the guard resumed his march. Step, turn, pause, step, turn, pause. The rhythmic perfection returned, calm and steady, as if nothing had happened. And yet everything had changed. The crowd around them exhaled in relief. Visitors whispered quietly to one another, marveling at the precision and control of the guard. Some pulled out cameras not to disturb, but to quietly capture the lesson in discipline. Mark put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "That's enough, man. You understand now, right?" Jake nodded, his face red but sober. I really do. I've never seen anything like that in my life." Leo added softly. "It's not about fear. It's about respect. That's what makes him..." Chris nodded in agreement. Yeah, we came here thinking it would be easy, maybe even funny. But it's not. This place. It's alive in a way. The silence, the order, it's powerful. Ryan, usually the most playful of the group, was quiet. He watched the guard resume his steps, each movement perfectly measured. He could feel the weight of history, the strength of generations of soldiers who had trained to guard this tomb, who had carried out this duty regardless of weather, fatigue, or distraction. The entire episode, what could have been a chaotic confrontation, had lasted less than a minute. 60 seconds. But in that short time, the bikers had experienced a lesson they would never forget. It wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about understanding. 60 seconds had been enough to teach respect, humility, and the power of calm authority. Mark looked at his friends one by one. Let's not do anything else here, he said softly. No photos, no videos, no joking. Let's just leave and remember what happened. Jake, still trembling slightly, nodded. Agreed, I don't want to test that again. I get it now. The bikers turned away slowly, walking back toward their motorcycles. The engines were quiet at first, almost hesitant. Then one by one they started, not loud and brash, but steady and controlled. A reflection of the lesson they had just received. As they rode away from the memorial, the morning sun shining warmly on their backs, the silence inside their minds was profound. Not a word was spoken for several minutes. They didn't need to explain what had happened. Each of them carried the memory, the lesson, and the weight of the moment in their hearts. Mark finally spoke, breaking the quiet. You know, that was probably the most important 60 seconds of my life. Jake looked at him. Yeah, it felt like time slowed down. I saw it all clearly, what honor really means. Leo added, It's crazy how one person, calm and disciplined, can teach so much without moving fast or yelling. Chris smiled faintly. I don't think I'll ever forget that, ever. Ryan nodded quietly. Neither will I. That guard didn't have to fight or shout. He just stood there, and that was enough. The ride continued, quiet but thoughtful. For once, the sound of their engines didn't matter. They were not showing off, not racing, not joking. They were reflecting, processing, and learning. The 60 seconds they had witnessed had changed the tone of their entire trip. By the time they stopped for lunch later that day, none of them wanted to talk about the incident too much. The lesson had already been absorbed. They didn't need to repeat it, and they didn't need anyone else's approval. They had learned firsthand what respect, discipline, and honor truly meant. That day, the bikers left the memorial not with the pride of defiance or the thrill of rebellion, but with quiet humility. They understood something deeper, that strength doesn't always shout, that authority doesn't always force, and that respect is earned through calm consistency and unwavering dedication. The day after the incident, the 5 bikers woke early, still carrying the memory of the previous morning. The quiet ride, the tense 60 seconds, and the presence of the guard had left a lasting impression on each of them. Even though they had returned home the day before, the thoughts of that guard and the tomb of the unknown soldier stayed with them, replaying in their minds like a silent film. Mark was the first to speak during breakfast. You know, he said, stirring his coffee slowly, I keep thinking about how calm he was. Not one shout, not one fast move, and yet I felt every word he said, even before he spoke. Jake nodded. He hadn't smiled yet that morning. Yeah, it was like he didn't even have to try. Just being there, standing still. It taught us more than any lecture ever could. Leo leaned back, his fingers tapping on the table. It's strange. We went there expecting a fun stop, a quick photo opportunity, maybe even a laugh. And instead we got a lesson about life, respect, and discipline. All in 60 seconds, Chris added. I think that's what made it so unforgettable. The way he moved, the way he carried himself, it demanded respect. Not because he forced it, but because he earned it. Ryan, who was usually the most talkative and playful, was quiet. He looked down at his plate, then said softly, I can't stop thinking about all the soldiers who were never identified, who are buried there. That guard, he's standing for them every single day. That takes real courage, even if no one notices. The group sat in silence for a few moments, letting the words sink in. None of them were laughing. None of them were joking. For once, the energy of the room was calm, reflective, and serious. Later that day, they decided to meet again near the city, away from their usual routes. to talk about what had happened and how it had affected them. As they sat under the shade of a large tree in a quiet park, Mark spoke first. We need to think about what we learned, not just about the tomb or the guard, but about ourselves, how we act, how we approach life, and how we respect things bigger than us. Jake nodded slowly. I realized I've always treated some things lightly, like rules are meant to be tested. But some rules, they're there for a reason. And some places, they deserve more than just attention. They deserve respect. Leo looked at the group, his expression serious. Do you guys think we can carry this lesson forward? Not just here, not just for a day, but in everything we do? Chris smiled faintly. I think we can. We just have to remember how it felt. That pause, that silence, that 60 seconds when everything changed. Ryan added, it's about awareness. About understanding that some actions have consequences, and some places and people are beyond our usual jokes and pranks. That guard wasn't scary, he wasn't angry, but he commanded respect in a way I've never seen before. The conversation continued, calm but intense, as each of them reflected on the experience. They spoke about their usual rides, the fun and laughter they shared, and how this one event had shifted something deep inside them. For the first time, they considered more than just thrill and entertainment. They considered meaning, responsibility, and integrity. Over the next few weeks, the story stayed with them. Whenever they went on rides, visited other landmarks, or even stopped at ordinary places, they remembered the tomb of the unknown soldier and the guard who had silently taught them a lesson. They carried themselves differently, noticing details, following rules, and respecting spaces that demanded reverence. Mark found himself thinking about the event often. One evening, while sitting alone on his porch, he wrote in his journal, "We went looking for adventure but found a lesson. A single man standing in silence can teach more than any crowd or noise ever could. Respect is quiet, but its power is loud. Discipline is invisible, but its effect is unforgettable. Honor is not just for soldiers. It is for everyone who chooses to act with awareness and care." Jake, too, felt the change. He spoke to his family about the incident, explaining not the fear he had felt, but the lesson of respect and discipline. He realized that respect is not a one-time act. It is continuous. Every day he tried to remember the guard's calm authority and the stillness of the memorial, and he carried it into his daily life. Leo began to notice how small actions could affect people in ways he hadn't considered before. A simple gesture of courtesy, a moment of patience, or even silence in the right place. These were all lessons from that single minute. He felt proud to have learned them, even in such a surprising and unexpected way. Chris often told friends and fellow riders about the experience, but he didn't exaggerate or dramatize it. He spoke simply, about the guard, about the 60 seconds, and about how respect and discipline had changed the way he saw the world. People who listened were struck not by the story itself, but by the quiet sincerity with which he told it. Ryan, who had always been playful and energetic, now carried a calmness that surprised his friends. He didn't lose his humor, but he learned when to pause, when to listen, and when to act with consideration. The memory of that morning had taught him patience and awareness in a way that nothing else could. Months passed, and the bikers' rides continued, but the energy had changed. They laughed, they raced, and they explored, but they carried a sense of responsibility with them. Every ride became a reminder that some places and moments were bigger than fun, bigger than thrill, and bigger than attention. Some things demanded quiet reflection, not noise or action. One weekend, the group returned to Arlington, this time not to challenge, not to test, and not to take photos. They simply stood a respectful distance away, watching the guard march with the same precision and calm as always. They didn't speak. They didn't move unnecessarily. They just observed, quietly honoring the service and dedication of the man who had taught them so much without ever raising his voice. As they left, Mark said softly, "We'll never forget this. Not the guard, not the silence, not the lesson." Jake added, "It's funny. We came looking for adventure, excitement, maybe even trouble, and instead we found humility. I think that's better than anything we expected." Leo nodded. "Exactly. That 1 minute changed how I think about everything. About people, about respect, about life." Chris smiled. "And it's a reminder that some lessons don't need words, just attention. Some lessons don't need force, just presence." Ryan, quiet as always now in these moments of reflection, added, And some lessons stay with you forever. That 1 minute, I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life. The 5 bikers rode away from Arlington again, the engines humming softly, the wind brushing against their helmets. The thrill of speed was still there, but now it was accompanied by thoughtfulness and awareness. They had learned something far more powerful than any ride, race, or stunt: the value of respect, discipline, and honor. Years later, each of them would remember that moment vividly. Whenever they faced difficult decisions, moments of impatience, or situations that demanded awareness, they would recall the calm authority of the guard, the silent lesson of 60 seconds, and the memory of standing in the shadow of something larger than themselves. It was more than a story about bikers and a guard. It was a story about humility, about lessons learned in the quietest way possible, and about the power of respect that doesn't need to be shouted to be felt. And in the hearts of those 5 friends, the memory remained, and a guiding presence that reminded them, always, that some challenges are not about strength or defiance, but about understanding, listening, and honoring what is greater than any one person. That day, they realized that true adventure isn't always found on open roads or in the thrill of speed. Sometimes it's found in quiet moments, in the presence of discipline, and in the awareness of honor. And sometimes 60 seconds is all it takes to change a lifetime.